Oh boy, this is going to be fun and it's going to be a little hard at the same time for some of you to hear, but it's a splash of cold water that I think will enlighten you as to how wealth building really works on a virtuous cycle in our business. And so, in this presentation, in this video, you are going to learn the 3 steps to a powerful balance sheet. But you are also going to learn why that is so important and why it is so hard to pursue these 3 steps and the simple adjustment you need to make to how you practice your business and what you focus on so that you can get there. Pay careful attention, folks. This stuff is really, really critical to pay heed to in your future if you haven't done so already in the past. And if you have paid attention to your balance sheet, this will give you a new way of thinking about how to do a much better job. So we're going to jump right in. If you have not subscribed to this channel and you like what you're hearing, or you dislike what you're hearing, but you recognize it's meaningful, then please go ahead and subscribe and give us a like so that you can receive these videos and notifications of them as they come out almost every week. This chart reflects in the orange line the growth of U.S. household wealth since the 1970s through last year. Okay. And the bottom blue line reflects the growth of GDP. GDP is the amount of production our country does in a given year, sort of like the amount of income, okay, that we generate as a country. And the orange line, household wealth, is like our balance sheets. How many assets do we have in terms of net asset value, meaning the value of the asset less any liabilities that we have attached to them, okay? And what you will note is that there has been a tremendous growth in household wealth from about 3 to 4 times GDP to over 6 times GDP occurring over the last basically 25 years approximately, okay? And I personally know many restaurateurs who have been able to participate in that growth of U.S. household wealth, okay? And I know many restaurateurs who have not, whose own wealth and the value of the balance sheet of their restaurant has basically grown more or less in line with GDP and not in line with what has happened to many in the overall economy, okay? The purpose of this video is to help you to start thinking about how you can breach that gap with time by adjusting your practices, okay? Now, I want to give you an example for clarity. Chipotle from 2006 to 2011 has had its assets the value of its assets, grow from about 600 million to about 6.6 billion. That's an 11 times growth in value of its assets, okay? And the first question we need to answer is, what is behind asset growth at a very high level, okay? And Chipotle shows us very clearly. So Chipotle's net income during the same period has grown by 15 times, from about 400 million to about 652 million. And our income growth is what acts as sort of the fuel, or maybe you can think of it as the bricks that build up our balance sheet size. Why is that? Because every year of positive income, that retained income sits on your balance sheet as retained income, and that number goes growing over time, right? And reflects a sort of stacking up of your retained income. And what happens in the rest of your balance sheet is largely based on what you do with that income, right? And so retained income does not equal cash generally, because you'll take some of that income and invest in assets, as an example, okay? And so you might also take some of that income, invest in other more liquid assets like US treasuries or stocks or bonds in a careful way that allows you to have some outperformance of a percentage of your liquid assets as compared to cash, which is always falling in value. Okay. And so the key to learn is as you retain income, it goes into your balance sheet that accumulates over the years. This is a simplified explanation, but that's basically what happens. And that gets reflected as cash or other assets as you use that retained income in the rest of your business. And so the more years of growing income you have, like Chipotle, the more years of growing assets that you have, like Chipotle. Okay. That's the key. So, step 3, because I'm going in reverse order, I'm going to count down from step 3 to step all the way to step 1, is you want to grow and keep growing your income in general every year, and that will grow your balance sheet, not just linearly, but higher than linearly if your income is higher than the year before, okay, compared to others in your market, okay? Grow your income every year, and your balance sheet will grow at a faster rate than the year before. And particularly if you can do this faster than others in the market, you are building even more assets that you can use to leverage or to turn into liquid assets so that you can reinvest into your business so that you can keep growing faster than others. Okay. It's that size of your balance sheet that gives you the resources to keep out investing others so that you can actually earn more income over time, right, compared to them, and continue to build up your balance sheet ever more. That is the vicious cycle or the virtuous cycle, excuse me, that you're looking at, that you're looking for. Okay. So many of you will have seen my revenue growth rate curve, but I'm giving you a slightly different twist on it today. For those of you who don't know it, let me explain. Okay. Look at opening day on the far left. That little black dot reflects the day you opened for business in your restaurant, the very first day you opened for business, right? And as that black line moves to the right, time is passing, okay? And initially your growth rate is quite high because you're starting from zero, okay? And you have a period of time where you have a very high revenue growth rate because of the low baselines that you have, right? That growth rate is high because you are novel in the market. You're first open in the market. People are driving by you, seeing something new. You put your own twist on it. They're hearing about that. People are going by and trying it, and they're telling others, I just tried this new restaurant, because people always want to tell everybody else when they tried a restaurant first, right? And you have this sort of optimized novelty, okay? And that is driving that high growth rate. But at some point, people are driving by you so often that they don't see you anymore, right? And so many people come to you for the first time, they're not talking as much about you anymore, and your novelty starts to fall. And as your novelty starts to fall, your growth rate starts to fall. And inevitably, what happens is almost all restaurants over time, it might be over a year, it might be over 5 years, could be even more for some who've done a particularly good job, their growth rate falls to more or less the growth rate of their market, okay, as their novelty wears down. So, what I want you to understand is that those restaurants or those restaurant businesses, okay, if we're talking about chains or large groups that have really powerful balance sheets, only really need to grow 2 to 4 times, the 2% or 4% faster than the growth of the market. And now I mean points. So if the market is growing at 4%, they need to grow at 6% or 8% on an ongoing basis to give them significantly more income than everybody else has. Okay. So what I need you to understand is to get to that high level of income growth over time only requires sort of an incremental amount of revenue growth compared to everybody else over time. Okay, compounding. So how does that work exactly? Some of you will be familiar with this particular table. I've used it before recently, but I'm going to also use it in a slightly different way. So at the top, it shows you how time plays a big role in income growth. Okay. And I want to describe the table for you. If you look at A, the very top arrow shows that this is a P&L over a period of years, and I'm just showing the first year, the fifth year, 10th year, and so forth. The middle arrow shows the revenue growth rate of 5%, and the third arrow shows the expense growth rate at just 1 point less than your revenue growth rate. Okay. B, the top shows us we start as $1 million revenue restaurant, and C just shows you sort of the standard cost, sort of percentage of revenue that each cost of goods sold and each expense item started at in year one. Okay. D shows you how much EBITDA or net operating income, more or less, was produced after year one. Okay, with sort of standard assumptions, and that is roughly 6%. Okay. If you just wait 20 years, okay, of 5% revenue growth, and you are controlling your expense growth at 4%, then if you follow D to the right, your net operating income, which are more or less similar to EBITDA, grows from about 60,000 to about 420,000. But what's most important is it grows to roughly 6% of revenue to roughly 20% of revenue. Okay. And so time allows you, with discipline like this, to grow your income and therefore to grow your balance sheet. You just need to have the staying power to maintain a market rate of growth and a lower than market rate growth of your expenses. Okay. Now, expense cutting does not really have a great impact over time to your income and therefore to your balance sheet, because there's only so much you can cut. So if you look at the bottom of this same chart, I'm suggesting that if you had a 5% cut of your expenses, you would add about $32,000 of EBITDA or net operating income. So your adjusted EBITDA or adjusted net operating income will be about 93,000. But it's really hard, as you know, to hold on to that money because we are in competitive environments. And the reason that most people's margins and ratios are fairly similar is we tend to have to reallocate anything we cut to other things to maintain our competitive level, right? And so you don't see restaurants that are able to cut year after year after year and have a material impact on their net operating income as compared to just letting revenue and holding of growth rate of expenses over a period of time. Okay, so expense cutting doesn't really impact that much on income over time. So what impacts is time plus revenue growth rate. This is the same table, okay? But you look at A and your revenue growth rate is 7%, but because you're growing faster, you should be able to hold your expense growth rate at roughly 5% rather than 4% or 6%. Why do I say that? Because ultimately, we know that we have a lot of fixed expenses. Rent is generally fixed over long periods of time. Okay, our labor costs will rise, but it won't rise proportionally to our revenue if we are doing things correctly, and so forth and so on. Okay, so the faster your revenue growth, generally, the slower your expense growth as a portion of your revenue growth. Okay, and when that happens, if you look at B below, at the first arrow, just letting 20 years pass, your EBITDA or net operating income is more than double what it was under the first scenario, with just 2 points more of revenue growth. Rather than 5%, you have 7%. Okay. That's a variance by year 20, about $494,000 just in that 1 year. But cumulatively, over 20 years, you created net operating income or EBITDA of about $3.5 million more than you would have otherwise. Okay. So in summary, to grow your balance sheet, you must grow your income. To grow your income, your target must be to have 2%, like I'm showing here, or 3 points or 4 points more revenue per year than your competitors do. And if you do so, that builds a lot more income that allows you to have more retained income, that allows you to have a much more powerful balance sheet to basically pursue your strategic purposes, but also to build more wealth for shareholders as a result. Okay. So step 2 is build a revenue growth rate that is at least 2 to 4%, 2 points to 4 points higher than competitor every year for many years, right? Sounds easy, but we don't know how to do that. Okay. And so that's where we're going to get into in terms of step 1. Okay. So I want to review today something that I've not laid out clearly before. Okay. But there are 6 competitive advantages required that help you to build that higher level of revenue growth every single year compared to others. Okay. But I want to tell you why they are so hard, not just what they are, but why they're so hard, and how to adjust your approach so that you can actually get over that difficulty and start focusing on the right things to create those competitive advantages. Okay. So we're going to go over 6 core sustained competitive advantages. The first one is marketability, which is positioning your concept, your facility, and other approaches so you attract more attention than others do in the market. Now, what I want to tell you is I'm going to be developing courses on each one of these 6 core sustained competitive advantages. And the first one on marketability is already under development. Okay. If you cannot make your overall business more attractive to the marketplace, then you will have lower income, right? Because you're spending more money to get more people in because you're having to increase your advertising costs, or your pricing flexibility is not as great. And so your margins are lower than those that are more attractive, correct? And so there is a knock-on effect if you are not highly marketable. What are some examples of business that are highly marketable? Well, Starbucks didn't spend advertising dollars for many, many years because we were attracted to that business for whatever reason. The French Laundry doesn't have advertising costs, right? Noma doesn't have advertising costs. They are very attractive to the marketplace for reasons that you're going to learn about in that training, okay? But if you can't figure out how to make yourself very attractive to the marketplace, which you can do from day one, or you can do if you've already been in business for 15 years, as you're going to learn in that training, then you are not building a competitive advantage that is going to outperform in revenue growth and therefore outperform in income growth and therefore outperform in balance sheet growth. Okay. Hope that's clear. Innovation and operating practices. Most small chains, even forget about independent restaurants or 1 or 2 restaurants, even most small chains do not have an innovation practice. Okay. They do not have in place a system of innovating around their positioning strategy, which is developed through marketability. Okay. That enables their positioning to get stronger and stronger and stronger every year, rather than finding that their novelty is wearing off. When you have an innovation system in place that is allowing your position to get stronger and stronger and stronger, what you find is novelty is not wearing off, but novelty is increasing because of those innovations, and that drives your revenue growth up. That helps you to sustain that higher rate. Okay. And of course, behind that, you need to have operating practices, which most restaurants are in tune with. Okay. But they need to always be at or ahead of the volume that those innovations will drive. Okay. And that means that the more that those innovations can be omni-channel, for example, and drive more business through different channels, not just dine in, the more you're going to have the operating practices in your kitchen and in your front of the house to some extent to be able to handle that volume. Okay. That would be a second course. Okay. Growth practice is a third sustained competitive advantage that you need, because positioning is showing us how we intend to be different, right? Innovations are optimizing our differences over time, showing the world that we are manifesting that positioning strategy. Okay. Growth practice is how do we get those innovations out into the marketplace, and how do we continue to let people know about our strengthening positioning so that they hear us compared to all that other noise in the market? And a lot of people think about this as marketing, but there's a lot more to it. Marketing is a fairly empty word by itself, and these are really your marketing systems of launching and awareness practices that drive uh, your ability to be heard as compared to everybody else. Okay, if you don't have that competitive advantage, even if you have great innovations, they will just sit on your menu and not really make a great impact to your revenue. Okay, this is an obvious one, but it's quite difficult for most to ever achieve, and that is having a recruitment and retention program that enables you to outcompete others in finding and holding on to the best talent you can afford at any given time of your development. And this is really hard to do because small businesses, even small chains, don't have competitive advantages yet in terms of their financials, right? They don't have such efficient cash flow yet that they can really compete with much larger companies, both in and outside of the revenue space. Okay, and so they're all relying on going to Indeed or going to other services to announce that they have job openings, and they're all relying maybe on adjusting their pay scales in line with what the market is doing. But there are other systems that you can develop that make your ability to recruit and retain talent a competitive advantage compared to those things that everybody else can do. And if you haven't hit on those, even if you have everything else I've just talked about, obviously your ability to sustain that revenue growth and not upset the marketplace is going to be really hard, versus it should be improving if you have these systems in place. Okay, so there's going to be another training on how to outcompete in this. Okay, 5 is hold yourself accountable. So we talked about the value of time, right? You need to have systems in place, and then you need to let time unfold, right? So you have to let your positioning strategy unfold over time, and to continue to peel back those onion layers so you understand your own positioning better and better and better. You need to get better and better and better over time at your innovation practices and your operating practices, as you're probably already doing in the latter, right? And over time, they get more and more effective to handle growth, right? You need to let your growth practices and your recruiting and retention competitive advantages get better and better and better over time, right? And you need to hold yourself accountable to all these programs. And it's really hard to do that because it takes quite a bit of time, right, for them to mature and unfold. And many of us get distracted by the next shiny thing, and we don't actually allow our systems of work to mature to the level that they need to hold on to that revenue growth advantage long term. Okay, holding yourself accountable to everything I just went through long term is the key. Okay, and finally, corporate finance systems. Many chains, even small even small to mid-sized chains, and many independent restaurants have less than perfect accounting. They don't understand uh, finance from a strategic sort of capital allocation, and how to raise capital and allocate those resources efficiently. They don't understand the government's practices that are needed to actually attract and retain great shareholders. They don't actually understand how valuation multiples change over time, and when you're going to go out and raise equity versus debt. Okay, they don't understand when institutions will come in versus they won't come in. They're missing that whole corporate finance practice. Okay, and this practice becomes really important once you have all those other parts of your business model in place, because if you're not reporting correctly and not building the systems correctly and not understanding the capital markets correctly, then you will still hit a hard ceiling. Okay. So our last training over time will be about appropriate corporate finance systems that also support this long-term growth of revenue and income that allow your balance sheet to continue to improve so that you have ever more balance sheet resources to promote ever more ways of sort of reinvesting in your business to grow even more as a result, all of which snowballs into more income and more wealth for shareholders if done appropriately. Okay. So these are the 6 core sustained competitive advantages. You should screenshot this and really pay your most careful attention to them over all else. Okay. Now, how do you do this? Okay. The problem that most restaurateurs have is they will dabble in all of these different areas, but it's actually not how it works. You need to go and start with marketability and really dial in your positioning strategy and make that work at a very a level that really connects emotionally with customers, okay, and with your community as a whole. And only when you have more or less fixed that, because you'll always be fine tuning over time, but it is working, should you go and worry about the next thing. Okay. And then you fix that and you worry about the next thing. You have to stop being a dabbler and you have to dig into these areas one at a time. And so when I work with clients, we work on one major barrier to growth and scale at a time, starting with marketability. And then we work our way up because it takes time for new practices and ways of doing and being to actually turn into and translate into much better results. And it takes time to like change our habits and adapt new systems, right? And so they need to be fully dialed in to be long lasting enough that you can hold yourself accountable to that particular new way of doing things before you move on to the next. If you're not taking that approach, you're always dabbling and you're really not becoming more competitive in any of these as a result. So, in summary, your step 1 is to build, snowball, and sustain your 6 core competitive advantages one at a time. Every time you do so, starting with the first one, it will add to your revenue growth rate. Okay. And so, step 2 is to just implement step 1 so that it naturally impacts revenue growth rate. Okay. And the more you stay focused on that step 1, the more step 2 will happen on its own. And step 3 is to grow and sustain high levels of income compared to others in your market, which happens naturally if your revenues are growing, right? Which happens naturally if you are just staying focused on those dominoes, those 6 dominoes in that order to the right depth and focus of work that I just gave you. That is the key to having a powerful balance sheet over time, is to start with marketability and work your way forward. This has been 3 steps to a powerful balance sheet. I hope you have enjoyed this particular training. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. All my information is below this video, and I wish you a fantastic, fantastic day.